Welcome to this episode of the ASSEDEL podcast. Today I'm speaking here to Pelin Musil, a professor specializing in Turkey and democratization in Turkey. We will be talking a lot about Turkey's path currently, both foreign policy and domestically, and a little bit about what the European institutions can do about that. So I've introduced you briefly, but perhaps you'd like to say more.
Thank you for your invitation. This is Pelin Musil. I'm currently an associate professor of political science at Several University, and I also teach at in Anglo-American University. So my specialization, as you said, is mostly on contemporary Turkey, democratic backsliding, authoritarianism.
Great. So the first question that I have for you here is when you're looking back at the first years of AKP rule in Turkey, did you see any early warning signs that the government was starting to exhibit authoritarian tendencies?
Yeah, the current government, under the leadership of Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, was elected in 2002. And during its first term, I can say that there were not really signs. Like between the 2002 and 2007, the first term of the government, we actually see that the country has really democratized to an extent that has not been witnessed in the past. By that time, the major threat to Turkish democracy was seen as the military, or the reserved domains of the military and the state, secular state establishment, which was considered to be biased against religion. And 2002 and 2007, that first term in government was really dedicated to EU accession, a lot of negotiation talks with the EU, and there was a clear tendency from the government side to be a member of the EU. And we also see that in this 5 years was really really increasing the number of NGOs, their organizational strength. So it looked like democracy was flourishing. But it was happening under a government which was considered quite suspicious by the secular state establishment and the secular segments of the society. So by that time, the major rift in society was between secular and religious camps. The first sign of democratic backsliding or the authoritarian tendency, I can say, it happened in the second term as of 2007. And it was the time when the EU accession talks basically failed and it did not move forward after the Cyprus conflict, which was the main trigger that actually froze those negotiations. And once it was clear that it's not moving forward, we saw that the government, the rise of populist rhetoric in government. And also there were no like the populist rhetoric. It still looked democratic, by the way. Populism was mainly targeting the secular state establishment and the military. And as I said, it was like considered the main threat in Turkey to democracy. So the fact that the government was basically praising the civilianization of the regime and that it should be the right of the elected government to be independent in its policies, like they all sounded democratic. So actually, in the scholarly literature, it's considered still as a democratization phase of Turkey, 2007 and 2011. However, we really see clear signals of really majoritarianism. So we see a decline in the willingness to resolve the Kurdish conflict in a liberal sense. Like there were not really concrete steps taken, which was another important issue for Turkey. And rather, the government really concentrated on removing this reserved domains of the military from the system, and it did so in 2010 through a constitutional referendum. Yet this constitutional referendum, which was actually aimed to crack down this military's power, also uh, They claimed that it was also going to give more independence to the judiciary. However, it actually enabled a more partisan state system. So while they were basically eradicating the power of the military, they were actually enabling a system in which they could have more partisan influence. I think 2010 constitutional referendum is a very major step of a clear authoritarian tendency because it came as a package which looked democratic at one point because of the the decline of the military, but also it also introduced these new measures of judicial appointments, which gave more power to the executive, basically, to make those appointments in the judicial system. So I would say 2007, 2011, the second term in government was very majoritarian, was very populist. The narrative still looked like it was democracy, but it deviated from a liberal understanding of democracy.
Okay, I see. So would you say that there are any particular factors that make the Turkish case unique that would make Turkey particularly vulnerable to democratic backsliding, or is this something that could happen virtually in any democracy?
There has been vulnerabilities historically and culturally. Turkey is based on a very strong leadership culture, like the Turkish culture. Political culture is based on seeing really strong leaders. So, which makes civic responsibility and activism a weaker aspect. It's a very leader-dominated, elite-based system. Like there has been elections, but these elections are held between really leader-dominated parties. Parties are quite detached from society in the sense that their candidate selection processes are determined from the top. There is no such thing as, for instance, primaries. And so, indeed, like when people say like Turkey is moving toward authoritarianism, but it is not easy because the country has 70 years experience with democratic elections. I tend to agree with that. But at the same time, we must know that this history, this experience with democracy was really mostly something that happened among elites and a competition among elites and people casting their votes. So there was no strong participatory culture. And also democracy came to Turkey in 1950 through a consensus among the elites. It was not the people that actually brought democracy. It was not their revolutionary attempt to bring democracy. It came as a top-down mechanism, like through the elites that brought democracy to Turkey. So weak civil society, and with what happens when the civil society is weak, it also creates favoritism, clientelism, and lack of social trust among the people. So these were already some very important weaknesses, which I think are today the key reasons why Turkey's transition to democracy, it makes it really hard today.
Okay, all right. And how then would you say that the methods of more authoritarian control in Turkey have changed over the recent years, looking towards the last 5 years or so? What are the main techniques used by the government now in order to reinforce control?
Yes, so we are talking about almost 20-year process now. I would say democratic backsliding started as of 2007. Like some scholars like start the process with 2011, but as I said, like 2007 was really the year when it started becoming majoritarian and then authoritarian. So, like, what happened if I compare the first decade and the second decade? The first decade was more based on the party's majoritarian understanding. So, we had a very electorally strong political party and a charisma of the party leader. And it quite actually appealed to the society. So through this strong party and charisma of a leader, that the elections were democratically won by this party. So if you look at the elections of 2007 and 2011, the next two elections were democratic, but when based on the popularity of the party and the leader. But the party and the leader used this popularity to eradicate the institutions of democracy, and we see a really like the rise in the number of referendums. So the first referendum in 2007 introduced like a presidency that can be popularly elected. By that time, president was being nominated through parliamentary procedures, but then the president started being popularly elected. And 2010 constitutional referendum brought down a more partisan judiciary. Through this popularity, basically the party polarized the society in a way that, it's the people's party, people's power, but the institutions, the horizontal checks and balances started deteriorating. And in this sense, like Turkey really is a textbook case of democratic backsliding. Popularly elected charismatic leaders using the linkage, a plebiscitary link with the people to eradicate the institutions. So what happened afterwards is that in Turkey that the party lost significant support, and during that time also there was like the economy was doing more or less fine. Yet, like when the decline in economic performance, like it kind of created some impact. In 2015 was the breaking point when it was clear that the government party, the incumbent party, can no more be elected as a single party. So in 2015, when the party lost majority in elections, we saw also a change in authoritarian practice, like toward more authoritarian practices. So it was not anymore pure majoritarianism, but now but really employing authoritarian practices in institutions. So crackdowns in media, journalists, politicization of the civil society or NGOs. The system, and in 2017 they introduced a presidential system and electoral alliances. Why? Because the party was no more sufficient to win elections alone. It needed some allies. So it introduced authoritarian power sharing, started having other parties as allies, and this started happening under presidential elections. And today, if you look at today, like because now it's like really have gone to a very, I mean, you can call today's process more as authoritarian deepening rather than backsliding. That this power sharing mechanism also expanded and expanded. The party, the state started co-opting other actors into the system. And the most prominent example today is the Kurdish party. It used to be a very strong opponent of the regime, but now today it's co-opted through a so-called peace process. So today the state has become more authoritarian, more repressive, and the parties matter less. It used to be the strength of the party. Today, parties matter less. There are presidential elections, and once a president is popularly elected, he can create his own inner circle from unelected officials, and this unelected body can actually rule the country. So the system, the regime derives its power not from people, but from its nationalist ideology, from its repressive instruments, and also foreign policy, which we will come probably a bit later. Like the foreign policy, the fact that that the international system is becoming more security oriented is giving also more power to Turkey.
Okay, so you mentioned that Turkey in some ways is a textbook case of this backsliding. So just very briefly, when you're comparing it to other such cases, are there any implications that you can draw for where Turkey might be headed in the future?
In my work, I used to compare Turkey to Hungary. I also compared it to Tunisia. Today, I am actually working on a project where I compare Turkey to Serbia. There are there has been many similarities and also differences in each case. With Hungary, I think the first 10 years of democratic backsliding and this party-oriented vision of backsliding was the same. A popularly elected party, charismatic leader, gaining majorities, and then dismantling institutions. So this was very similar also to the Hungarian case. And the way the opposition parties reacted to this change was also similar. Like in both Hungary and Turkey, we saw opposition parties coordinating, joining forces to beat the incumbent party in elections. And we see that both incumbent parties, like Orban's Fidesz and Erdogan's AKP, they also used similar tactics during elections, such as post-truth politics. They labeled the opposition in a, with their own narrative. They harassed the opposition during elections using similar narratives as the traitors of the country. Like, how do you do it? It's done through disinformation, that you take a specific statement from a really long interview and conversation, and that one specific statement or even one sentence is framed in a different narrative, in a completely different narrative. You take it out of the context and build it in your own narrative. So this is also a very important tactic used by incumbents during elections, this type of disinformation. So it was very similar to Hungary. But today also I see more differences than similarities. Because Hungary is a member state of the EU, and no matter what, the level of repression the Turkish opposition faces is not is just too much compared to what happens in Hungary. The major opposition party in Hungary, TISA, today, the leader is a member of the European Parliament, and there is no way to jail or to repress this type of politician. Whereas in Turkey today, the main opponent, the most important influential opposition figure is jailed, and currently the government is trying to ban this political figure, who was the mayor of Istanbul, from running in the next elections. So the level of repression is really too high compared to Hungary today. Hungary has a chance, I can say, but I mean, Turkey's chances are lower. And maybe I will just mention a little bit also Serbia, that I see that the two countries are today similar when it comes to the rise of protests and the rise of the resistance movement. Um, um, so in both contexts today, we see that political parties have turned into street actors, like they are doing street activism, grassroots activism, because they have less leverage I mean, they can only be influential in elections, but when there is no election, what can a party do, opposition party do, when there is nothing to do in parliament, in the sense that you are not an influential actor, you cannot pass the laws. And so you turn into a street actor, and they are trying to join forces with street protests and resistance movements. So in that sense, they are similar. But again, as in the case of Hungary, I see Turkey has less chance compared to Serbia today, because again, like the level of repression is much higher. We see that again in the Turkish case, the important figures are jailed, but that we don't see that level of repression in Serbia. The problem with Serbia is that the parties are more fragmented there, and there are less strong parties compared to Turkey, where the main opposition party is kind of strong. And according to the polls, if in Turkey today there was a free and fair election, the opposition party could have won. But the point is, we don't know whether there will be such an election. So these are some cases. According to compared to both Hungary and Serbia, I see that the chances are much lower
Okay, so under these
to
repressive
turn into democracy. Yeah.
conditions that you mentioned, what would you say are the most effective forms of resistance and protests in Turkey today?
So again, according to the textbooks, there are social, political, and institutional resistors in backsliding countries. So social resistors are these protest movements and the people themselves that take part in streets. Parties, yeah, they have to use the moment of election in a very strategic and way. It's an opportunity election, so you need to really mobilize people if you want to make a change. And there are also institutional resistors within the state. I mean, of course, the state is kind of captured by the authoritarian leaning incumbents to the maximum level, but you can still find some remainders, some remnants of the previous democratic phase, that there can still be some democratic actors within the judiciary, for instance, or within the Supreme Board of Elections. So what is important is that these different types of actors in the social, political, institutional realm must join forces. Like we see that the party and the people are kind of more united than before. The main opposition party, that is the most important figures and the challengers to Erdoğan's regime, are from this party today, and they are being jailed one by one. Yeah, like the mayors of this party, the ones that have been really successful in local elections, they are one by one taken. And if they are not taken, then they are forced to join the government party. So so what's happening is that the people and the party are becoming more united against this repression. We don't see much. I don't. From the institutional resistors, from time to time, we see that certain judicial decisions can be taken in favor of the opposition. Like there are still some democratic actors within this judicial bodies, but we also see that they are being slowly. It's not slow anymore. I'm sorry. They are co-opted even more speedily than before. It used to be slower. Now it has become really more intense. So this is what's happening. So this type of resistance, party and the people becoming together. But I have to also highlight that I think the people could have been more vocal, and this is also something distinct from Serbia. I think in Serbia, people are more vocal. In Turkey, because of this weakness of the civic activism that I mentioned previously, people are not used to being much in the streets or getting organized. Like they still care about their jobs or keeping their jobs. They still care about going to vacation. There is an element of fear still, and they there is a collective action problem. Like if I go, will others also join? Because you know that others will not join, so you don't go because you may be the one to lose the job, or you may be the one to be repressed. So unfortunately, this unification of the people, I don't see it being very strong in Turkey, and they still expect the party leaders to save them from this regime. Again, like the emphasis on like leadership, it's kind of weakening. Like this historical background and the culture is not giving full strength to the protests and the party's efforts.
So, turning towards the role of external actors in all of
Yeah.
this, particularly the European Union and maybe a little bit also the Council of Europe, what role would you say they've played in Turkey's democratic backsliding? Like, is it more of a guardian of the last vestiges of democracy, or have they almost been more implicit in this backsliding in their partnership with the government?
I think they have done their jobs in the way they should. I mean, after the democratic backsliding process started and intensified after, let's say, 2013, 14, 15, like we have seen both in EU reports that Turkey is violating human rights, it's not on the right track. And so after the crackdown on the media, the journalists, and the human rights activists, the most famous one being, for instance, Osman Kavala, and the crackdown on the Kurdish party leader, again, the most famous case. These are the most famous cases, but there are many others as well. Selahattin Demirtas. So, like the rulings of the European Court of Human Rights are like they kind of also forced their limits, and they did anything in their power to condemn. I mean, they basically followed the procedures and found that there is a violation. The state is actually violating. Uh, so, like, in that sense, yes, they are doing. When I come to like maybe the early stages before the backsliding started, um, the EU-Turkey relations was not how it was supposed to be, in the sense that like Erdoğan or the leader of the incumbent party has really used the anti-EU rhetoric after the failure of the negotiations and the EU accession process. That the party really used this double standard rhetoric, which gave more power and more power to the government party today. So basically, that the rhetoric was that the EU did not do justice to Turkey because we were a Muslim country. And that the EU proved itself that it's a Christian club. So and we are not going to bow down anymore to what the EU demands from us because of this double standard. So the failure of the accession talks was kind of politicized. A new narrative was built over it, and it's added more power to the incumbent. Was it a mistake of the EU? Well, I would say there is some truth, this element of truth in this really heavily politicized discourse, because when it comes to the official reasons, the Cyprus conflict is being used mostly as a reason. But we also see that Turkey did quite a lot, and there was a referendum before Cyprus joined the European Union. And the Turkish side, as you know, Cyprus is as an island. There is one Turkish and the Greek side, and the Turkish side is not recognized. So there was a referendum, and the Turkish side basically said yes, and the Greek side refused, and like it joined the EU under within this structure without the resolution of the issue. So and why did this happen? Could it really be because the cultural differences? Maybe or maybe not, but like there was a time when the efforts were really invested, and I'm not sure the EU played a just role there. But this then really was again politicized. And also there is one more thing that I think is very important in terms of what the EU did, adding power to the incumbents and like triggering the backsliding process, was 2016 migration deal. So it was right after 2015 elections in Turkey when it was the first election that took place in an unfair and unfree environment. The 2015 November elections was the first unfair, undemocratic election in country, and this is actually the point in history when you can say Turkey stopped being a democracy. So right after this, Turkey and EU signed a migration deal, and which gave more power to Turkey in international stage and the government recognition despite this authoritarian tendency. So, and also today, the EU is more in favor of, when I say EU, I mean the main decision-making actors like the Commission, the Council, and they are more interested, of course, in a security building and security infrastructure in Europe, and they want to have less conflicts with Turkey. They want to see Turkey as a partner. So these developments help the authoritarian deepening in Turkey.
All right. So you mentioned the European Court of Human Rights and how they've been more or less consistently ruling against the
Yeah.
government. But as I understand, there are still a lot of issues regarding the enforcement of these rulings. They're being basically consistently disregarded. So, are there any steps that you would say either domestic or international actors can take to ensure that the ECHR's rulings are respected within Turkey?
Right. Well, this is an important question. I mean, what else can it do, or whether can it do more? I'm not sure there is more than what it's already doing. Like again, like the more the state does not follow the rulings, the more it deviates from Europe, and there is a danger that its membership in Council of Europe may fall. But would it really be a threat to Turkey? Maybe under these conditions it may not be, because what matters is now today the security partnerships and the democracy and rule of law is like there is no leverage over these things, bring no leverage anymore. But what can it do? I think, like first of all, they should the European Human Rights Council of Europe must persist in documenting the violations. So this should continue. The job should continue, that the violations that are witnessed in Turkey should continue to be documented. Yet there should also be some caution, that they should exercise caution in their criticism of Turkey because of their really extreme levels of anti-Western rhetoric, anti-Europe rhetoric. It can provoke a backlash. It can actually even add more power again to Turkey, as it happened in the past. This anti-European stance of the government. For example, in 2021, President Erdoğan threatened to declare 10 Western countries' ambassadors as persona non grata after they stated that they should release Osman Kavala from prison. And Turkey's potential suspension from Council of Europe first not only may have any effect, as I said, on the authoritarian deepening, but also it may lead to a backlash again, in the sense that, again, another double standard that's happening to Turkey. So it could be used, like these type of acts, it can really be used domestically to sustain power, because nationalism, people's power, sovereignty, these issues is what really keeps the strength of the regime. What the EU can do, or what recommendations and Council of Europe bring, maybe instead is to provide necessary physical protection for the people in exile, like the journalists, activists, the politicians that are in exile currently in Europe, in accordance with the legislation of the host countries, of course. maybe they can increase protection over these. This is something that can be considered. And like that they should continue to monitor the progress and the outcomes of the cases concerning political prisoners in Turkey. I mean, the number of political prisoners has really increased and is increasing every day. This like the more the number, I think it's the more difficult to follow, but they should continue to be closely and in detailed way. They should be monitored and how they are progressing, whether there is any progress or not. Also maybe one more thing is not just the rulings on the government, like the European actors, like the ones that have like more soft power. Um, Again, like it could be some like member states of Council of Europe or some specific institutions, as well as members of European Parliament, the mayors of European capitals, like not really the ones that have executive power, but they can continue to have a transnational linkage with the pro-democratic, pro-domestic actors. This keeps them alive. Like when they raise the concern about the Istanbul mayor, for instance, who is jailed, um, like it keeps the dissent alive. Again, it should be done with caution because there is a very extreme levels of anti-Western rhetoric that also boosts the power of the government. So a very delicate balance, very difficult. This is what I can say.
Okay, thank you so much. That's my last question. So that's I think been really insightful, and yeah, there's clearly a lot of challenges ahead, but hopefully Turkey's future will look eventually brighter than its past.
We will see. Yeah.
All right, thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm a little bit more pessimist, but there's always hope. Yeah.